shillings per 50 kilogram bag of fertilizer. As we speak, there's an elaborate program of farm inputs that is being distributed to listed farmers all over the country as a means of ensuring that we enhance the level of our food supply. Let me also mention, ladies and gentlemen, that the cost of any commodity, food inclusive, is a function of the cost of inputs. And globally, Kenya being not an exception, is influenced or informed by the forces of supply and demand. In a situation like ours, where the demand is either constant or escalating, the only measure, sustainable measure that the government can undertake to reduce the cost of food is to enhance the supply. And this is why the government has been making deliberate efforts by making sure that we have got fertilizer available to farmers. These are basic but highly fundamental economic principles that influence prices in the market globally, and Kenya as a country is not an exception. We have also witnessed a bit of flooding, and the government again is taking appropriate action to mitigate the effects of flooding, which has affected several parts of the country. Having said that, I want to go to the next issue, which is about skirmishes and acts of violence that we have witnessed in several parts of the country in the recent past. From the onset, may I state clearly that in the view of government, the current demonstrations that we have been witnessing, the cost of living. But it is largely influenced by the fact that a section of the political class, to date, despite having exhausted all the legal mechanisms through which election disputes can be alleviated, still are not convinced that they are out of government. And the cost of living and the demonstrations emanating therefrom is a disguise as opposed to the reason for the current demonstrations that we are witnessing. While we accept and recognize the fact that our Article 37 of the position of government is that such demonstrations and picketing must be exercised or undertaken within the confines of the law. That picketing and demonstrations should not lead to destruction of people's property. It should. Let me also state that the right to property and life is a fundamental, and according to whose property it is, the government will protect the property of each and every Kenyan. If the property of an itinerant, it is as painful, is destroyed. Law clearly articulates that each and every Kenyan is equal before the law. Each and every Kenyan is equal before the law. Protect the property and lives of each and every Kenyan indiscriminately. Considering the riots that we witnessed last week, on Monday, Raila Odinga called for subsequent demonstrations this week, Monday. The government went out of its way to put in place an elaborate property is not witnessed within the CBD. Adequate security was deployed by government within the central business district, and with the efforts of the demonstrators, under the tutelage and stewardship of Raila Odinga having been thwarted and failing to gain access into the CBD, they went into the environs of the city. Their democratic rights whipped up sentiments which led to destruction of property. GKB 856D, a Toyota Corolla belonging to the Kenyan police. Such acts of violence, especially when being meted on government property or the property of anybody else for that matter, cannot be entertained. And the government will not entertain that moving forward. We are aware that against the background of the government having deployed heavy security within the CBD, certain hooligans also invaded private property elsewhere, took advantage of that. Such acts are regrettable, just as the acts we have witnessed downtown on River Road, directed at small business enterprises. And the government has put in place or launched investigations to ascertain who could have been behind the invasion of such property, while at the same time also undertaking comprehensive investigations to determine who could have been behind the action of property belonging to common traders within the environs of the city. Let me state, ladies and gentlemen, without fear of contradiction, where people who are dissatisfied with the results of elections resort to acts of violence as a way and means of intimidating the duly elected government into submission. Under the tutelage of His Excellency President William Samoei Ruto, respects the rule of law, respects the Constitution, and will uphold it to the letter. For avoidance of doubt and for purposes of clarity, under no circumstances will the current government be cowed into submission through acts of violence and intimidation which are outside the confines and ambit of the law. If it has happened before that through acts of violence and intimidation we have ended up with Nusumkati governments, if I may use that phrase, it does not mean that it will happen with the current government or any other government for that matter in the foreseeable future. If anything, it should not. We must accept to operate within the confines of the law, where we go for elections every 5 years, the winner country. That is what we would wish to see. And by extension, we want to thank Kenyans for peacefully going back to their daily undertakings subsequent to the 2022 elections. It was a sign of maturity. It was a sign that our country has finally become of age and our democracy has matured, that we can go to elections today and tomorrow we are back to our daily undertakings, despite the fact that there was a winner and a loser in the elections. That is what the law stipulates, and that is what our 2010 constitutional dispensation advised, and that is what we appeal to Kenyans to continue upholding. We also want to appeal once more to Kenyans to continue with what they have exhibited in the recent past of ignoring unnecessary calls by politicians to resort to acts of violence or to stop them from going for their daily-to-daily activities. The government has put in place elaborate mechanism to ensure that the lives and property of Kenyans will be protected, that those Kenyans who want to go to work and undertake their daily course continue doing so without intimidation from any quarter inclusive. We are aware that a section of the political class in the opposition led by Raila Odinga has again called for another set of demonstrations on Thursday. Let us take this opportunity to assure Kenyans that the government will put in place adequate security measures to ensure that all Kenyans are able to undertake their daily course without intimidation from any quarter. Go ahead with your businesses as usual. The government is firmly in a position to create an enabling environment to ensure that you will not be intimidated by anybody from any quarter whatsoever. Let me also espouse one thing, that the only means of forming government is through our electoral process. And that process is very, very clear. And it is well defined in the minds of Kenyans. You will not use an orthodox means of getting into government, either fully or partially through an orthodox means. It is for Kenyans to become part of government or to form government. So it's not just a question of telling Kenyans that let's converge and march to State House. It will not happen because it is against the law. And if you think that that is the approach that you are going to use to intimidate William Ruto into submission, then please get it from government that you will wait for a long, long time. You will wait for a long, long time. It will not happen. We have one government in place under William Ruto for the next 5 years up to 2027. Anybody who is not happy with the outcome of those elections, having exhausted the legally acceptable mechanisms of addressing electoral grievances, can wait for 2027. As Kenya Kwanza government, we are not going to engage in politics between now and 2027. If we are to engage in any politics, it will be politics of the economy, because we are concerned about the fundamental challenges facing the common mwananchi. We are not going to engage in any politics between now and 2027. And we are appealing to all segments of the political class to take cue and follow suit. Those are my brief comments on behalf of government this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and perhaps we can now welcome questions.